When five menacing Night Ravens bikers surrounded a quiet woman at the Starlight Drive-In, they thought they'd found themselves an easy mark. Instead, they encountered a decorated Navy SEAL combat medic whose response would not only change their lives forever, but spark a nationwide movement of redemption. What unfolded that evening would be shared millions of times across social media, transform an entire town's perspective on second chances, and prove that sometimes the most important battles aren't fought in foreign wars, but right here in our own backyard. Let's get started with this incredible story. But first, don't forget to hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's story will be even more amazing. Emily M. Rodriguez stirred her coffee absently at her usual corner booth in the Starlight Drive-In, watching the Oregon sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. The small silver trident pin on her leather jacket caught the fading light, the only visible sign of her 8 years as a Navy SEAL combat medic. At 33, her athletic frame carried the quiet confidence of someone who had saved lives under heavy fire, though nothing in her relaxed posture suggested she was anything more than another customer enjoying a peaceful evening meal. "Here's your apple pie, Em," Joe called out, sliding the plate across the worn Formica table. The diner owner, a Vietnam veteran himself, had been running Starlight for over 3 decades. He'd grown fond of his quiet regular, even if it had taken him months to discover her military background. "How are things at New Horizons? Those art therapy sessions for the vets still helping?" Em smiled, her dark eyes warming slightly. "Got 3 new veterans starting tomorrow. One's a young Marine who lost his leg in Fallujah. Art's giving them a way to express what they can't say in words." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "Though I still can't believe none of them knew I was a SEAL until that news piece last month." "Some things are better left quiet," Joe replied, understanding in his voice. "Though I gotta admit, never met a female SEAL before you. Must have been quite a journey." "First class that allowed women," Em said softly, her mind briefly flickering to memories of Bud S training, the brutal cold of San Diego's surf zone, the countless times she'd been told to quit. "But that's behind me now. These days, healing matters more than hurting." The gentle chime of the diner's bell cut through their conversation. Instead of the usual evening crowd of truckers and local families, 5 members of the Night Ravens motorcycle gang swaggered in, their black leather cuts adorned with patches that promised trouble. Their leader, a towering man known as Thunder, carried himself with the aggressive confidence of someone used to making others back down. "Well, well," Thunder's voice boomed across the quiet diner. "Ain't this a cozy little spot we've found ourselves?" His eyes swept the room, lingering predatorily on a young waitress who quickly looked away. Em watched their reflections in the window, her trained mind automatically assessing the situation. Thunder stood about 6 feet 4 inches, easily 250 pounds. His second in command, a lean man with a cobra tattooed up his neck, kept his right hand suspiciously close to his jacket pocket. The other 3 spread out through the diner, their heavy boots echoing on the checkered linoleum floor. "Hey, sweetheart," one of the Ravens called out to the young waitress, deliberately knocking over his water glass. "Looks like you got some cleaning to do." The waitress, barely 20 and clearly frightened, kept her eyes down as she gathered her serving tray with trembling hands. At a nearby booth, a mother with 2 small children began quietly gathering their things, trying to slip away unnoticed. "What's wrong with the little one?" Thunder laughed, turning toward the sound of a child's whimper. "Maybe Mama needs some company to help calm those nerves." The woman clutched her children closer, fear evident in her eyes. "The lady and her children are leaving. Step aside." Em's voice cut through the tension like a blade, calm and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. The diner fell silent. Thunder turned slowly, his eyes finding Em in her corner booth. "Well, look what we got here, boys. Seems like somebody forgot their manners." Em took another sip of her coffee, her hand perfectly steady. "Actually, I learned my manners in the Navy. 8 years as a SEAL tends to teach you a thing or two about respect." The Night Ravens leader's laugh was forced, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as he took in Em's composed stance. "Navy SEAL? You expect us to believe that?" "Don't have to believe it," Em replied, setting down her coffee cup. "But you do need to let these people leave." The tension in the diner crackled like electricity before a storm. "You know what happens to people who get in our way?" Thunder growled, taking a menacing step forward, his massive frame casting a shadow across M's booth. The silver rings on his fingers glinted under the diner's fluorescent lights, brass knuckles poorly disguised as jewelry. "Actually, I do," M replied, her voice maintaining that same surgical calm. "But the real question is, do you know what happens when you threaten someone who spent 8 years keeping their team alive under enemy fire?" The mother had managed to gather her children behind M, who subtly shifted her stance to provide better coverage. Joe had disappeared into the kitchen, hopefully calling the police. M calculated response times in her head. 7 minutes minimum for the first patrol car to reach this part of Maple Valley. The cobra-tattooed biker, who M had mentally dubbed Snake, edged closer to her left. His movement betrayed his intention before he even started. Sloppy, telegraphed, nothing like the trained fighters she'd faced during her combat tours. "Last chance to mind your own business, lady," he snarled. "Protecting civilians is my business," M responded, her dark eyes scanning the room continuously. 8 years of combat medicine didn't end when I took off the uniform. Sometimes the worst wounds aren't the ones that bleed. Snake lunged forward suddenly, attempting to grab M's arm. His move was amateurish, all aggression, no technique. M stepped smoothly aside, using his momentum to send him sprawling into a booth. Plates crashed to the floor, silverware scattering across the linoleum like shrapnel. Thunder swung his brass-knuckled fist in a wide arc, but M had anticipated the move. She ducked under his swing while simultaneously sweeping his legs out from under him. The big man crashed to the floor with an impact that rattled the diner windows, his pride clearly hurting more than his body. "You're going to regret this," Thunder snarled, struggling to his feet. Blood trickled from where he'd split his lip on impact. "Nobody messes with the Night Ravens. Nobody." "I've heard that kind of talk before," M replied, maintaining her position between the bikers and the civilians. "Usually from people who don't understand the difference between intimidation and real strength." "Real strength? That's keeping your teammates alive when everything's going to hell. That's patching up wounds while bullets fly overhead. That's what we learned in the SEALs." 2 more Ravens moved to flank her while the third blocked the door. M remained centered, her breathing steady, hands relaxed at her sides. The training that had kept her and her team alive through countless operations was about to serve a different purpose, protecting innocent people in a small-town diner. "Get her!" Thunder roared to his remaining men, but there was a new note in his voice. Uncertainty. The unshakable confidence of a bully was cracking in the face of someone who didn't fear him. What happened next would be viewed millions of times online, spark countless discussions about veterans in society, and become the catalyst for a movement that would transform not just their small Oregon town, but communities across the country. Em allowed herself a small, focused smile, the same one her teammates had learned to recognize when she was about to perform a particularly challenging medical procedure under fire. "I said get her," Thunder shouted again, but this time the fear in his voice was unmistakable. His remaining men hesitated, suddenly unsure about confronting this calm woman who spoke of combat medicine and showed no fear. The next 30 seconds would transform lives, challenge preconceptions, and show that sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that bring people together rather than tear them apart. As Thunder and his men closed in, Emily Rodriguez, former Navy SEAL combat medic, straightened her stance. She hadn't asked for this fight, but she was about to demonstrate why you don't threaten the wrong woman at the wrong diner. Through the window's reflection, she caught a glimpse of Joe filming everything on his phone from the kitchen doorway. Good. Documentation could be crucial later. More importantly, she saw the mother and children had almost made it to the side exit. Just a few more moments of distraction needed. "You know," Em said conversationally, as if discussing the weather, "in the SEALs, we had a saying, the only easy day was yesterday. But looking at your stance, your technique, I think today might be pretty easy too." Thunder's face purpled with rage at the insult, exactly as she'd intended. An angry opponent was a careless opponent, and she needed them careless right now. Behind her, she heard the side door click shut. The civilians were safe. Now she could focus entirely on the threat in front of her and show these men that true strength came from protecting others, not intimidating them. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Thunder charged first, his massive frame barreling forward with all the subtlety of a freight train. M moved with the fluid precision that only comes from years of combat training, years of knowing that one wrong move could mean death for herself or her teammates. She slipped inside his guard, using his own momentum and weight against him. A quick redirection of force, a precise strike to his solar plexus, and the Night Raven's leader found himself face down on the diner floor, his arm locked behind him in a hold that sent waves of pain shooting through his shoulder. "That's one," M said quietly, her voice carrying in the now silent diner. Snake, having recovered from his earlier tumble, pulled a switchblade from his boot. The blade clicked open with an ominous snap. "Not so tough now, are you?" he sneered, though his hand trembled slightly. "Actually," M replied, maintaining pressure on Thunder's arm while keeping her eyes on the knife, "you just made this easier. Assault is one thing, armed assault?" She nodded toward Joe's phone, still recording. "That's serious jail time, but more importantly, it tells me something about you." "Yeah? What's that?" Snake's voice cracked slightly. "That you're scared. Scared enough to need a weapon against an unarmed woman. The question is, what are you really afraid of? The fight? Or the fact that everything you thought you knew about strength is wrong?" One of the remaining Ravens, a younger member who couldn't have been more than 25, suddenly backed away. "I ain't fighting no SEAL," he declared, heading for the door. "Especially not one who patches people up instead of just taking them down." "Smart man," M nodded. "Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a fight you know is wrong." Snake looked at his fallen leader, then at his retreating companion, indecision clear on his face. The fourth Raven had already begun edging toward the door, leaving only Snake still holding his ground. "Last chance," M said calmly. "Drop the knife, and we can all walk away from this. Keep escalating, and I'll have to show you exactly what a combat medic knows about human anatomy. Trust me, I can hurt you a lot worse than you can hurt me." The knife clattered to the floor. "Good choice," M said, then turned her attention back to Thunder, still pinned beneath her. "Now we're going to have a conversation about respect, community, and what real strength looks like. I could break your arm right now, easily, but I won't, because that's not what I trained for. I trained to save lives, not take them, to heal, not hurt, unless you make me do otherwise." "Let me go," Thunder growled, but the fight had gone out of his voice. "First, you're going to promise me something. This diner, everyone in it, they're under my protection now. That includes your own people, by the way, because I've seen that look in your eyes before, in wounded warriors who've lost their way. The question is, are you ready to find a better path?" The sound of approaching sirens filled the air. Thunder struggled briefly, then went still. "This isn't over," he muttered, but his heart wasn't in it. "Actually, it is," M replied, carefully modulating the pressure on his arm. "But how it's over, that's up to you. You can leave here tonight as the gang leader who got beaten by a woman, or you can leave thinking about why a Navy SEAL combat medic would risk herself to protect strangers in a diner. About what real strength looks like. About the difference between being feared and being respected." Officer Maya Chen was the first through the door, hand on her weapon. She took in the scene, the scattered dishes, the knife on the floor, the fallen gang leader, and M's controlled stance. "Everyone okay here?" she asked, though her eyes never left M. "Just a small disagreement about proper diner etiquette," M replied. "I think these gentlemen were just leaving, weren't you?" Thunder slowly got to his feet as M released him, rubbing his shoulder. He looked at M, then at his scattered men, then back at M. For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "Yeah," he said finally. "We're leaving, but..." He hesitated, looking around the diner he'd intended to terrorize. What you said about finding a better path. New Horizons Center, where I work, opens at 9 tomorrow morning, M replied. Come by if you want to learn about real strength. Bring anyone else who's interested in change. As the Night Ravens filed out, followed closely by the police, the remaining customers burst into applause. M tried to wave it off, but Joe was already announcing that coffee was on the house for everyone. That was amazing. The young waitress approached M, hand still shaking slightly. Are you really a SEAL? Was, M corrected gently. Now, I help veterans and others find their way back to who they really are. Speaking of which, she turned to look out the window where Thunder sat on his bike, still not starting it, just sitting there in thought. I think I might have found some new people who need help remembering who they could be. The video would be uploaded within minutes. By morning, it would have hundreds of thousands of views. But what nobody knew yet was that this was just the beginning. The real story, about healing, redemption, and finding purpose through serving others, was about to unfold in ways nobody could have predicted. By midnight, the video had over 150,000 views. By sunrise, it was approaching 2 million. M woke up to her phone buzzing nonstop with notifications, messages, and calls from news outlets across the country. Female Navy SEAL takes down biker gang while protecting diner patrons, read one headline. Combat medic shows true meaning of leave no one behind at local drive-in, proclaimed another. M ignored them all and headed to work at New Horizons, hoping for a normal day. But normal wasn't in the cards anymore. Have you seen this? Maya Chen burst into her office, still in her police uniform from the night shift. You're everywhere. My daughter showed me the video this morning. She said you're like Wonder Woman, but better because you're real. It's not that big a deal. M tried to downplay it, organizing files for her morning art therapy session. Just did what anyone would do. No, Maya insisted, sitting down across from M's desk. What you did was remind people that veterans aren't broken, that we're still protectors. Do you know how many women veterans have been sharing this? You've given them a voice. Before M could respond, her office phone rang. It was Joe from the diner. M, honey, you need to get down here. Something's happening. Trouble? M was already standing, ready to move. No, just, you should see this for yourself. When M arrived at Starlight Drive-In 15 minutes later, she stopped short in the parking lot. The place was packed, with people actually waiting outside to get in. But what really caught her attention was the group of motorcycles parked in the corner of the lot. Not Night Ravens, but other local motorcycle clubs. Inside, Joe rushed over to her. They've been coming all morning, he explained, gesturing to the bikers scattered throughout the diner. Different clubs from all over Oregon, but they're not causing trouble. They're apologizing. A large man in a leather vest stood up from his booth. His patch identified him as the president of the Road Warriors MC. Miss Rodriguez? Got a minute? M walked over, aware that the whole diner was watching. The biker extended his hand. Name's Big Jim. I represent several legitimate motorcycle clubs in the area. What happened here last night? That's not what we're about. The Night Ravens give all bikers a bad name. We wanted you to know that we're here to support this establishment and its customers. That's unexpected, M replied honestly, shaking his hand. There's more, Big Jim continued. We heard you run a veteran support center. A lot of our members are vets. We'd like to help. Maybe set up a motorcycle maintenance program for veterans who need transportation. Give them something positive to focus on. Before M could respond, the diner's door opened again. Everyone turned to look. It was the young Raven who'd walked away from the fight last night, but he wasn't wearing his colors anymore. Ms. Rodriguez? His voice shook slightly. Can I talk to you privately? M nodded and led him to her usual corner booth. The young man couldn't meet her eyes at first. I was in Kandahar, he finally said. Army Rangers. When I came home, I couldn't fit in anywhere. The Ravens. They felt like brotherhood again, you know? But last night, watching you reminded me of my old captain. Always in control, always protecting others. And now? M asked gently. I want out, but it's not just me. Thunder, Mark, that's his real name. He's been talking all night. What you said about being a protector instead of a threat, it hit him hard. He's got a daughter, you know. Lucy. She saw the video this morning and called him crying, asked him why he was being a bully. Em sat back, processing this information. What are you asking for? Help. Not just for me, for all of us. Most of the Ravens, we're lost. Looking for what we had in service, that sense of purpose. You showed us there's another way to be strong. The diner had gone quiet, everyone trying to listen in. Em was aware of phones still recording, of how this moment might be another turning point. She thought about her own journey, about the countless veterans she'd helped find their way back. New Horizons opens at 9, she said finally. Come by tomorrow. Bring anyone who wants to change. We'll figure something out. The young man's eyes lit up with hope. Really? Even after what we did? Especially after what you did. Because you're proving my point, real strength isn't about intimidation. It's about having the courage to change. As the former Raven left, wiping his eyes, Big Jim approached again. We'll help, he said simply. Any of the Ravens who want to reform, they'll have support from the legitimate clubs. Joe appeared with coffee, beaming. On the house, as always. You can't keep giving me free coffee, Joe. Watch me, the diner owner grinned. Besides, business is booming. Look around. Em did look around. The diner was full of an unlikely mix. Families with children, bikers from various clubs, veterans who had seen the video and come to show support. Everyone was talking, sharing stories, building connections. Her phone buzzed again, another news outlet wanting an interview. But this time, Em didn't ignore it. Maybe it was time to tell this story. Not just about one fight in a diner, but about veterans finding their way home. About redemption. About how sometimes the right kind of strength can transform enemies into allies. Big Jim, she called out. That offer about the motorcycle maintenance program? Let's talk details. The next morning, Em arrived at New Horizons early, arranging the art therapy supplies and preparing for what might come. At 8:45, the first motorcycle rumbled into the parking lot. It was Thunder, Mark Thompson, alone without his Night Ravens cut. Didn't think you'd be first, Em said, meeting him at the door. Couldn't sleep, he admitted, his voice stripped of its previous aggression. Been watching that video over and over, seeing myself, seeing what we'd become. He pulled out his phone, showing Em a picture of a young girl, maybe 14, with his eyes and determined chin. This is Lucy, my daughter. She called me yesterday morning crying, asked me when I stopped being her hero and became the villain instead. Em nodded, unlocking the center's door. That must have been hard to hear. Hardest thing ever. Even harder than when her mom left, saying I'd never change. Mark followed her inside, taking in the peaceful atmosphere, the art on the walls, the photos of veterans helping veterans. Thing is, watching you fight, it wasn't just about the moves. It was how you carried yourself. Controlled, purposeful. Like my old drill instructor before. Before what? Before I got discharged. Marine Corps, 3 years in. PTSD, they called it. Couldn't handle civilian life. Found the Ravens, thought being feared meant being strong. More motorcycles pulled up outside. The young ranger from the night before arrived with 3 other Ravens. Then came Big Jim with some Road Warriors members. By 9 o'clock, the center's meeting room was full of leather vests and uncertain faces. Em stood at the front, looking at the unlikely group. So, who wants to go first? The young ranger raised his hand. 4 tours in Afghanistan. When I came home, everything felt wrong. Too quiet, too normal. The Ravens gave me what I was missing. Brotherhood, adrenaline, purpose. But it was the wrong kind of purpose. Others began sharing. Out of 15 Ravens present, 8 were veterans who hadn't completed their service for various reasons. 4 were sons of veterans who'd never found their own way to serve. All of them were looking for something they couldn't quite name. Here's what we're going to do, Em announced, walking to the whiteboard. First, we're starting a motorcycle maintenance program. Big Jim and the Road Warriors are offering to teach veterans who need transportation. We'll get help fixing up bikes. You want redemption? Start there. She wrote more on the board: community service, veteran support, family rebuilding. Second, those of you who are veterans, we have programs here: art therapy, counseling, job training, whatever you need. Those who aren't veterans but want to support them, we'll find a way. Mark stood up. I want to talk to Lucy's school. Tell them what happened. Show them how to be better than I was. Good, Em nodded. That's on the list now too. The meeting ran for 3 hours. By the end, they had a plan. The Night Ravens would disband, but something new would take its place. A support group for veterans and their families centered around motorcycle maintenance and community service. We need a new name, the young ranger suggested. Guardian Angels, someone called out, because we're switching from raising hell to watching over others. The energy in the room shifted. These men who had come in looking defeated were sitting straighter, eyes bright with purpose. Em recognized that look. She'd seen it in countless veterans who finally found their way back to themselves. Later that afternoon, Em returned to Starlight Drive-In. Joe had saved her usual booth, but she wasn't alone. Maya was waiting with her, out of uniform and grinning. Heard about this morning, Maya said as Em sat down. Words spreading fast. You know what this means, right? That I'll never have a quiet cup of coffee again? No, Maya laughed. It means we're seeing something new. When that video went viral, everyone focused on the fight. But the real story is what's happening now. Joe brought coffee without being asked. The diner's becoming quite the spot, he reported. Veterans, bikers, families all mixing together. Had some guardian angels in here for lunch. They helped an elderly couple change a flat tire in the parking lot. Em's phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark. Lucy wants to meet you. Says she wants to learn how to be strong the right way, like her dad is learning. As Em typed a reply, she thought about how much had changed in just 2 days. The viral video had captured a few minutes of action, but the real transformation was happening now, in quiet moments and small choices. You know what's really changing? Joe asked, sliding into the booth with them. It's not just about veterans finding their way. It's about everyone remembering what community really means. Em nodded, thinking about Mark and his daughter, about the young ranger rediscovering his warrior spirit in a positive way, about how a moment of confrontation had opened the door to connection. Sometimes, she said, watching through the window as former Ravens taught a young veteran's wife how to check her motorcycle's oil, the strongest thing you can do is show others how to be strong. A week after the diner incident, Em stood in the New Horizons parking lot, watching an incredible transformation unfold. What had once been an empty space was now filled with motorcycles, toolboxes, and people working together with purpose. All right, Mrs. Anderson, try starting it now. The young ranger, who now went by his real name, David, called out from beneath a restored Harley. The elderly veteran's widow turned the key and the engine roared to life. Her face lit up with joy. Michael would be so happy, she whispered, tears in her eyes. He always wanted me to learn to ride it. Mark Thompson, who had completely abandoned his Thunder persona, was supervising 3 other guardian angels as they taught basic maintenance to a group of young veterans. His daughter Lucy sat nearby, doing her homework and occasionally looking up at her father with unmistakable pride. Hey, Em! Mark waved her over. Need your help with something important. Em joined him at a makeshift desk they'd set up under a canopy. Spread across it were drawings, plans, and a list of names. Remember Mrs. Anderson's story about her husband's bike? Got me thinking, how many other veteran families out there have bikes sitting in garages collecting dust? Memories just waiting to be brought back to life? Em looked at the list. These are all local veterans' families? And active duty, too. We've identified 45 bikes in the county that belong to veterans who've passed or are deployed. We want to restore them all free of charge, get them running for the families, teach them how to maintain them. That's ambitious, Em said, but she was already seeing the potential. There's more, Mark continued. Lucy came up with this part. He glanced proudly at his daughter. For deployed service members' families, we want to offer free maintenance and riding lessons while their loved ones are away. Give them support. Something to focus on, show them they're not alone. A commotion at the entrance drew their attention. Big Jim was leading a group of road warriors in, followed by representatives from 3 other legitimate motorcycle clubs. Each bike was loaded with tools and equipment. "Heard you folks could use some help," Big Jim grinned. "We've got certified mechanics in every club. Time to put those skills to good use." Em watched as the parking lot transformed into an organized workshop. Veterans helping veterans, former troublemakers teaching safety courses, families finding new connections through shared memories of their loved ones. Maya appeared at her side, now a regular presence at these gatherings. "Local news is here. They want to talk about Operation Guardian Angel." "Operation what now?" "That's what the kids came up with." Maya gestured to where Lucy and several other teenagers were painting a banner. "They're calling it a revival of veteran legacy through motorcycle restoration." Pretty sophisticated for middle schoolers. The news crew captured something remarkable that day. Not just people fixing motorcycles, but a community healing itself. They interviewed Mrs. Anderson, who spoke about feeling close to her husband again. They filmed Lucy proudly explaining how her father and his friends were real heroes now, helping other heroes' families. But the most powerful moment came when David led a group of guardian angels in presenting a restored bike to a deployed Marine's pregnant wife. "Your husband's bike is ready for when he comes home," David told her. "And until then, we'll teach you everything you need to know about it. You're part of our family now." Later that evening, Em returned to Starlight Drive-In, exhausted but content. Joe didn't even ask, just brought her coffee and sat down across from her. "Saw the news," Joe smiled. "Those men. They're different now. Mark was in here for lunch with Lucy, paid for a veteran's meal without telling him. Just left a note saying, 'Welcome home, brother.'" Em nodded. "It's like they finally found what they were looking for all along. Not power over others, but the power to help others." "Speaking of help," Joe lowered his voice. "Heard about the trouble at Murphy's bar last night." Em tensed. "No, what happened?" "A bunch of out-of-town bikers started harassing customers. Before the police could even respond, 6 guardian angels showed up. You know what they did? Bought the troublemakers coffee, sat them down, and talked to them about purpose and respect. 3 of those bikers are coming to your center tomorrow." Em couldn't help but laugh. "They're becoming peacekeepers." "Just like you," Joe winked. "By the way, someone left something for you." He handed Em an envelope. Inside was a child's drawing. A figure in navy dress blues standing beside a motorcycle, surrounded by smiling people. At the bottom, in careful handwriting, "To Em, thank you for showing my dad how to be a hero again. Love, Lucy." Em pinned the drawing to the New Horizons bulletin board the next morning. It joined other symbols of transformation, photos of restored bikes, thank you letters from families, news clippings about the Guardian Angels community service. But more importantly, it represented something bigger than one viral video or one confrontation in a diner. It showed how a single moment of standing up for what's right could spark a movement of positive change. As Em looked out her office window at the busy parking lot where former enemies now worked side by side helping others, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories don't end with surrender, but with everyone rising together. The success of Operation Guardian Angel caught attention far beyond their small Oregon town. 1 month after the diner incident, Em found herself facing a new challenge: expansion. Veteran centers from 3 neighboring states were calling, wanting to know how to start their own Guardian Angels programs. "We've got a situation," Mark announced, walking into Em's office early Monday morning. He wasn't alone. With him was Congressman James Miller, a decorated Navy veteran himself. "Ms. Rodriguez," the congressman extended his hand. "Your program has caught the attention of the Veterans Affairs Committee. We're interested in turning this into a national initiative." Em gestured for them to sit. "That's unexpected." "Is it?" The congressman pulled out his tablet. "The original video has over 60 million views now. But it's what came after that got my attention. You've turned former troublemakers into community leaders. You've given veteran families new purpose. You've created a model that works." Mark spoke up. We've been getting calls from motorcycle clubs all over the country. They want to reform, want to help veterans like we're doing. But we need structure, resources. That's where I come in, Congressman Miller explained. I'm proposing a bill to fund veteran motorcycle restoration programs nationwide, based on your Guardian Angels model. But we need you to help set it up. Em leaned back in her chair. Congressman, we're just a small operation. Not anymore, Mark interrupted. Show her, Lucy. Lucy, who had been quietly sketching in the corner, brought over her tablet. On it was a map of the country with dozens of glowing points. Each light is a place where people want to start Guardian Angels chapters, she explained proudly. I've been helping Dad track the requests. The congressman nodded approvingly. This could be revolutionary for veteran support services. Combining motorcycle culture with veteran outreach, it speaks to a demographic we've struggled to reach. Before Em could respond, Maya burst in. Sorry to interrupt, but you need to see this. She turned on the office TV. A national morning show was running a segment titled, From Confrontation to Community, The Guardian Angels Revolution. The screen showed clips from their recent bike restoration event, interviews with veteran families, and scenes of former gang members teaching motorcycle safety to kids. This isn't just about bikes anymore, Maya said. It's about showing people there's always a path to redemption, always a way to serve. The congressman stood up. I'll give you time to think about it. But remember, Ms. Rodriguez, sometimes the greatest service we can render is showing others how to serve. After he left, Mark stayed behind. Em, we need to talk about Jake. Jake? Leader of the Iron Wolves MC from 2 counties over. They're like what we used to be, maybe worse. He came to see me last night. They want to change, but they don't know how. Em sighed. Mark, I know. We're already stretched thin. But that's why we need this national program, Mark insisted. We can't help everyone ourselves, but we can show others how to help themselves. A knock at the door interrupted them. It was David, looking excited. You're not going to believe this. Remember that group of troubled teens the court ordered to do community service with us? The ones you've been teaching basic maintenance? Yeah? Well, their probation officer just called. Since they started working with us, not one of them has missed a check-in. 3 have gone back to school, 2 got part-time jobs. They're saying our program works better than traditional intervention. Em looked at the map on Lucy's tablet, at all those points of light representing communities asking for help. She thought about Jake and his Iron Wolves, about troubled teens finding their way, about veteran families reconnecting through their lost loved ones' motorcycles. Mark, she said finally, get Jake on the phone. Tell him to bring his leadership here tomorrow. She turned to Lucy. Think you can help me prepare a presentation for the congressman? We're going to need to show exactly how this program can work on a national scale. Lucy's face lit up. Already on it. Dad and I have been making flowcharts and everything. Just then, Joe arrived from the diner with coffee and news. You'll never guess who just showed up at Starlight. 3 members of Old Night Ravens who left town before all this started. They saw the morning show and drove back from Washington. They're waiting to talk to you. Em looked around her office at Mark, once her opponent, now one of her strongest allies. At Lucy, whose father's transformation had inspired her to dream of helping others. At David, who'd found his way back to the person he'd always wanted to be. Tell them I'll be there in an hour, she said. And Joe? We're going to need more coffee. Looks like Starlight Drive-In is about to become command central for something bigger than we ever imagined. The Maple Valley Convention Center had never seen anything quite like this. 250 motorcycle club members from across the country mixed with veterans, social workers, and family support coordinators, all gathered for the first National Guardian Angels Summit. Em stood backstage reviewing her notes one last time. Nervous? Mark appeared beside her, wearing a new leather vest with the Guardian Angels emblem. A protective angel embracing a motorcycle wheel with the words, "Strength through service" beneath. Not about speaking, Em replied. More about what comes next. Jake's Iron Wolves are here. So are the Desert Riders from Arizona, the Coast Warriors from Washington, all former outlaw clubs looking to change. Mark nodded. just like we did. That's what worries you? That we're about to teach former rivals how to work together? What if old conflicts resurface? Mark smiled. Watch this. He pulled out his phone, showing Em a group chat. The screen was filled with photos of restored bikes, veteran family stories, and motorcycle safety class graduations from across the country. They're already working together. Old rivalries don't matter much when you're focused on serving others. Congressman Miller stepped up to the podium. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the woman who started it all, former Navy SEAL combat medic Emily Rodriguez. The applause was thunderous. Em walked out, taking in the scene. In the front row, Lucy sat with a group of other kids, all children of former gang members, all wearing Junior Guardian Angels t-shirts they designed themselves. Behind them, Jake and his Iron Wolves sat next to their former rivals, sharing notes about veteran outreach programs. 2 months ago, Em began. I stood up in a diner because it was the right thing to do. I never expected that moment to lead to this. But looking around this room, I see something remarkable. I see former enemies becoming allies. I see troubled pasts transforming into promising futures. She gestured to the screen behind her where photos began to cycle through. In just 8 weeks, Guardian Angels chapters have restored over 150 veteran-owned motorcycles. We've provided transportation to 75 veterans in need. Our youth mentorship program has helped 42 at-risk teens find better paths. The next slides showed before and after photos of motorcycle clubs, but Em continued. The most important restoration isn't happening to motorcycles. It's happening to people. Former rival clubs are now working together. Men who once threatened communities are now protecting them. Suddenly, the convention center doors burst open. A group of bikers in unfamiliar colors strode in. The room tensed, but Em continued speaking as if nothing had happened. Like our friends from the Mountain Riders who just arrived. They rode all night to be here because they heard about what we're doing. Welcome, brothers. You're right on time to hear about Phase 2. The tension dissolved as quickly as it had appeared. The newcomers found seats, welcomed by those around them. Phase 2 is about more than just bikes, Em continued. It's about creating a national support network. Every Guardian Angels chapter will be paired with a veteran center. We're not just fixing motorcycles. We're rebuilding lives, reconnecting families, restoring purpose. She motioned to David, who wheeled out a motorcycle covered by a tarp. This bike belonged to Marine Sergeant James Anderson. When he passed, his widow couldn't bear to touch it. Today, thanks to our program, not only is the bike restored, but Mrs. Anderson has become one of our riding instructors for military spouses. Mrs. Anderson herself walked out to thunderous applause, wearing her own Guardian Angels vest. The elderly woman beamed as she started the perfectly restored motorcycle, its engine purring like new. This is what we're about. Em raised her voice over the applause. Not just remembering fallen heroes, but keeping their legacy alive through service to others. The presentation continued with detailed plans for expansion, training programs, and community integration. But the most powerful moment came during the Q&A when a young biker from the Mountain Riders stood up. I got a confession to make. His voice shook. We didn't ride all night just to attend. We came because yesterday we were supposed to have a turf war with another club. But then someone showed us the video of what happened in that diner and what came after. We threw down our weapons and rode here instead. We want to learn how to be better. Em looked at Mark, who nodded. Then you're in the right place, she replied. Because every person in this room has a similar story. We're not here to judge your past. We're here to help build your future. The summit continued with breakout sessions led by veteran Guardian Angels. Mark taught conflict resolution. David ran a workshop on youth mentorship. Mrs. Anderson shared her experience connecting with military families. Later that evening, as the sun set over the convention center parking lot filled with motorcycles from across the country, Em stood with Joe watching it all unfold. Did you ever imagine that standing up to those bikers would lead to this? Joe asked, handing Em her ever-present coffee. No, Em admitted. But that's the thing about doing the right thing. You never know how far the ripples will spread. Just then, Lucy ran up with exciting news. Em, the Mountain Riders just pledged their clubhouse as a new veteran support center, and 3 other clubs are doing the same. Em smiled, watching as former enemies shared meals, traded stories, and planned a future built on service rather than conflict. The guardian angels were rising, and their wings were spreading far beyond anything she could have imagined. The crisis hit without warning 3 months after the national summit. M's phone lit up at 2 a.m. with an urgent call from Jake, the former Iron Wolves leader. "We've got trouble, Em. Big trouble." His voice was tense. "Remember those outlaw clubs we warned you about? The ones who refused to change? They're making their move." Em sat up in bed, instantly alert, her SEAL training kicking in. "What kind of move?" "They targeted Guardian Angels chapters. 3 of our bike restoration centers got vandalized last night. They're calling us traitors, saying we've gone soft, but that's not the worst part." "What is?" "They're threatening the veteran families we help. Left warning messages at Mrs. Anderson's house. She's scared, Em. We all are." Within an hour, Em had turned New Horizons into a command post. Mark and David coordinated with Guardian Angels chapters across 5 states. Reports kept coming in. More vandalism, more threats, all targeting their community service programs. "They're trying to force us back to our old ways," Mark growled, marking another incident on their map. "Want to prove we're still just thugs deep down." "Then we prove them wrong," Em replied firmly. "Get every chapter leader on video conference now." As screens lit up around the room showing concerned faces from across the country, Em saw the true strength of what they'd built. Former rivals united, ready to protect what they'd created. "Listen up," Em's voice carried the authority of her SEAL days. "This is exactly the test we've trained for. They expect us to retaliate with violence, to prove them right about us. Instead, we're going to show them what Guardian Angels really stand for." She laid out the plan. Every restoration center would remain open, but with increased security. Veteran families would have 24-hour protection, not from weapons, but from the constant presence of Guardian Angels members doing what they did best, building community. "Mrs. Anderson's house was vandalized," Em continued. "Tomorrow morning I want 50 bikes in her driveway. Riders fixing her fence, cleaning her yard, teaching motorcycle maintenance to the neighborhood kids. Show them that for every act of destruction, we respond with twice as much creation." "The troubled teens in our program are scared," David spoke up. "Some of their old gang contacts are pressuring them to choose sides." "Then we give them something better to choose," Em answered. "Launch Operation Legacy ahead of schedule. Get those kids working with veteran families, learning trade skills, earning their own Guardian Angels vest through community service." The next day, something remarkable happened. When the hostile bikers came to intimidate a Guardian Angels chapter in Washington, they found 100 community members forming a peaceful line outside the restoration center. Veterans, families, reformed bikers, and local business owners, all wearing Guardian Angels support shirts. In California, when they tried to threaten a veteran's widow, they found her garage turned into a community gathering spot, with Guardian Angels teaching motorcycle safety to neighborhood children, while others repaired bikes for disabled veterans. But the real turning point came at Starlight Drive-In. Joe called Em in a panic. A group of outlaw bikers had shown up looking for trouble. By the time Em arrived, she found Mark already there, sitting with the hostile bikers, showing them pictures of Lucy teaching other kids about motorcycle maintenance. "You think we went soft?" Mark was saying. "Let me tell you about real strength. Last week I helped a Marine's widow restart her husband's bike for the first time since he died in Afghanistan. Watched her teach their son how to check the oil, just like his dad used to. That took more courage than any fight I've ever been in." Em watched from the doorway as the outlaw bikers listened, their expressions changing from scorn to curiosity. One of them, a younger man with fresh prison tattoos, spoke up. "But what about brotherhood? Loyalty?" "Look around," Em stepped forward. "This is true brotherhood. Guardian Angels from 20 states offered to ride here tonight to protect this diner. Not to fight, to serve, to show what loyalty really means." Over the next few hours, more arrived, not to confront the outlaws, but to show them a different path. David brought some of his teen mentees, who proudly demonstrated their mechanical skills. Mrs. Anderson arrived with cookies and stories about how the Guardian Angels had helped her heal from her loss. By midnight, 3 of the outlaw bikers had turned in their colors, asking how they could join the Guardian Angels program. By dawn, their entire chapter was sitting in Em's office, filling out Veteran Support Center volunteer forms. "You know what really changed their minds?" Mark told Em later. "It wasn't fear of our numbers. It wasn't even seeing all the good we do. It was realizing they could be part of something bigger than themselves." The crisis had become a catalyst. Over the next week, chapters that had been targeted responded by expanding their community programs. Every act of vandalism was met with a new restoration project. Every threat was answered with an invitation to join their cause. "You were right," Jake told Em during an emergency leadership meeting. "The best way to fight darkness isn't with more darkness. It's by shining a light so bright they can't help but see a better way." As Em watched the sunrise over new horizons, now protected by a peaceful vigil of guardian angels and community members, she realized that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from showing them they never had to be enemies at all. Today, in Washington, an extraordinary scene unfolded on the National Mall. Over 5,000 motorcycles, led by former Navy SEAL combat medic Emily Rodriguez and the Guardian Angels, gathered for what they're calling the Restoration Rally. Em watched the coverage from Starlight Drive-In, surrounded by the original group that had started it all. The television showed aerial shots of motorcycles arranged to form a massive angel design visible from above. What began as a confrontation in a small Oregon diner has evolved into one of the most successful veteran support programs in recent history, the reporter continued. The Guardian Angels' response to recent threats against their organization has drawn national attention and praise from military leaders and peace advocates alike. "Turn it up," Joe called, bringing more coffee to their increasingly crowded corner booth. The diner was packed with both locals and visiting Guardian Angels members, who had come to see where it all began. The screen showed Congressman Miller speaking from the Capitol steps. The Guardian Angels model represents a revolutionary approach to veteran support and community transformation. Today, I'm proud to announce bipartisan support for the Veterans Restoration and Community Integration Act, which will provide federal funding for similar programs nationwide. Mark's daughter Lucy, now sporting her own Junior Guardian Angels vest covered in merit badges for community service, bounced excitedly in her seat. "Dad, they're showing your speech next." Sure enough, the coverage cut to Mark standing at the National Mall podium, looking nothing like the intimidating gang leader he'd been just months ago. "We used to think strength meant making others fear us," he was saying. "Em showed us that real strength is using your power to lift others up. Every bike we restore, every veteran we help, every kid we mentor, that's not just community service, that's warrior spirit in action." The diner erupted in cheers as the coverage showed David leading a demonstration of their youth mentorship program. Troubled teens working alongside veterans, learning skills while finding purpose. But perhaps most remarkable, the reporter continued, is how the Guardian Angels handled the recent threats to their organization. Instead of retaliation, they responded with an expansion of their community programs, turning potential enemies into allies. Em's phone buzzed with a message from Jake. "You seeing this? Just got word 5 more outlaw clubs requesting meetings. They want to learn about the Guardian program." Maya, who had been quietly taking notes beside Em, spoke up. "You know what's really amazing? The numbers just came in. Since the crisis, veteran suicide rates in communities with Guardian Angels chapters have dropped by 28%. We're actually saving lives." The news coverage shifted to Mrs. Anderson, interviewed in her garage-turned-community center. "These people, they didn't just fix my husband's motorcycle," she said, wiping tears. "They helped me turn my loss into a way to help others. Now I teach other military spouses and widows. We heal together." A new segment began showing the transformation of former gang clubhouses into veteran support centers. The reporter interviewed reformed members working alongside the veterans they once intimidated. "Look at this," David pointed to his phone, showing Em a social media trend. Guardian Effect was trending, with people sharing stories of how the program had changed their communities. "National headquarters just called," Mark added. "Police departments across the country are reporting decreased gang activity in areas where Guardian Angels chapters have opened. They're calling it the positive peer pressure effect." Em took it all in. The crowded diner, the national coverage, the messages pouring in from around the country. She thought back to that evening when she'd stood up to protect a frightened family, never imagining where it would lead. "You know what's funny?" she said to Joe, who had finally taken a break to sit with them. "Everyone keeps talking about how we changed these bikers, but the truth is, we just showed them who they could be if someone believed in them." "Speaking of belief," Joe grinned, "wait until you see what's coming." The diner's door opened, and in walked a group M never expected, her old SEAL team, led by her former commanding officer. They were followed by representatives from every major veterans organization in the country. "M," her old CO smiled, "we need to talk about taking the Guardian program global. Turns out other countries have veterans and troubled bikers too." As the diner filled with more voices, more stories, more plans for the future, M realized that what had started as a single stand against bullying had become something far more powerful. A movement that proved the strongest forces for change aren't the ones that tear things down, but the ones that build people up. Joe brought another round of coffee for everyone, then paused by M's chair. "You know, honey, when you first started coming here, you were trying to leave the warrior life behind. Instead, you showed us all what being a warrior really means." M watched as Lucy taught some visiting kids about motorcycle safety while their parents, former rivals from different clubs, shared stories and plans for new community projects. "Sometimes," she replied, "the hardest battles we fight are the ones that end in peace." The transition to international expansion began in the most unexpected way. M was on a video call with a Guardian Angels chapter in California when an unusual request came through from the British Royal Marines. "They're calling it Operation Global Guardian," Mark explained, pulling up emails on the New Horizons main screen. "Military units from 10 countries want to adapt our program. But that's not even the surprising part." "What is?" M asked, though she had a feeling she knew what was coming. "Motorcycle clubs, not just American ones anymore. We're getting requests from groups in Europe, Asia, Australia. They've all seen what happened here." The first test case came from Japan. A group of former Bosozoku riders, members of Japanese motorcycle gangs, had reached out after seeing the Guardian Angels story go viral on social media. They wanted to work with local veterans and transform their clubs into community support organizations. "But how do we adapt our model to different cultures?" David wondered during the planning meeting. "What works in small-town Oregon might not work in Tokyo." M thought about it for a moment. "Then we let them show us how it should work. We provide the framework. They build it their way." Within weeks, M found herself on a video call with Kenji, a former Bosozoku leader turned community organizer. His group had already started working with Japanese Self-Defense Force veterans, combining motorcycle restoration with traditional Japanese values of honor and service. "We call ourselves the Rising Sun Guardians," Kenji explained through an interpreter. "Your story showed us how to keep our brotherhood while finding a better purpose." The adaptations were fascinating. In Britain, former outlaw bike clubs worked with Royal Marine veterans to create heritage guardians, restoring classic British motorcycles while helping veterans transition to civilian life. In Australia, the program incorporated long-distance outback rides as therapy for PTSD veterans. Back at Starlight Drive-In, M shared these developments with Joe over the usual coffee. "Look at this," she showed Joe her tablet. The screen displayed photos from around the world. German bikers helping rebuild a veterans memorial. Brazilian riders organizing motorcycle safety courses for favela youth. South Korean chapters working with military families along the DMZ. "It's like watching light spread," Joe mused. "Each country makes it their own, but the heart stays the same." Lucy, who had become the unofficial chronicler of the Guardian movement, was creating a digital map showing the program's global reach. "Every dot is a different story," she explained proudly, "but they're all connected." The real breakthrough came when a United Nations peacekeeping official contacted them. He had an unusual proposal, using the Guardian Angels model in post-conflict zones to help former combatants reintegrate into society. "Think about it," he urged during a conference call. "If you can turn rival biker gangs into community leaders, Why not apply the same principles to regions recovering from war? M found herself working with an increasingly diverse team. Maya handled cultural adaptation training. Mark coordinated with international motorcycle clubs. David developed youth programs that could work across different societies. The most powerful moment came during the first International Guardian Angel Summit in Geneva. Former rivals from dozens of countries shared stories of transformation. A British ex-rocker worked alongside a French former gang member to demonstrate their veteran outreach techniques. Japanese Rising Sun Guardians taught Australian chapters about incorporating meditation into their program. "You've created something extraordinary," Congressman Miller told M as they watched the summit unfold. "This isn't just veteran support anymore, it's become a model for turning conflict into cooperation." But it was Mrs. Anderson who perhaps understood it best. She had been invited to speak about her experience to an international audience. "When I lost my husband," she told the gathered crowd, "I thought I lost everything. The Guardian Angels didn't just restore his motorcycle, they showed me how to turn grief into purpose. Now I see the same thing happening worldwide, people taking their pain and transforming it into power to help others." The movement kept growing in unexpected ways. In Ireland, former paramilitary members worked together through the program, using motorcycle restoration as a way to heal old wounds. In South Africa, the program brought together veterans from opposite sides of old conflicts. One evening, as M watched video feeds from Guardian programs around the world, she noticed something remarkable. Whether it was in Tokyo or London, Rio or Berlin, the same scene played out. Former enemies working side by side, teaching young people, helping veterans, building community. "You know what this reminds me of?" Mark said, watching footage from a new chapter in Lebanon. "That night in the diner, when you showed us there was another way to be strong." "But this is different," M replied. "Now, they're showing each other. Each new chapter learns from the ones before, then adds their own wisdom to share with those who come after." Joe, ever present with his coffee pot, had the last word. Maybe that's the real legacy of what happened here. Not just showing people a better way, but giving them the tools to show others. As M looked at the global map of Guardian Angels chapters, each point of light representing countless lives changed. She realized that sometimes the smallest moments, like standing up to bullies in a diner, can spark changes that cross every border and bridge every divide. The Guardians had truly risen, and their wings now stretched across the world, carrying a simple but powerful message. True strength isn't about domination but transformation, and sometimes the most powerful changes start with a single person willing to stand up for what's right. The United Nations General Assembly has just passed a groundbreaking resolution officially recognizing the Guardian Angels Initiative as a model for international peacebuilding and veteran support. M watched the broadcast from an unexpected location, the White House Rose Garden. She was there with Mark, David, and representatives from Guardian Angels chapters worldwide, waiting to meet with the President's Task Force on Veteran Affairs. "Still can't believe this started with a confrontation in my diner," Joe said. He had been specially invited to witness this historic moment and insisted on bringing his coffee pot. "Now look at you, changing international policy." The changes were happening faster than anyone could have predicted. The Guardian model, as policymakers called it, was being adapted for various social programs worldwide. Schools were using modified versions to handle bullying. Police departments were implementing its principles for community outreach. M, her former commanding officer, approached, tablet in hand. "The UN Secretary General wants to discuss implementing the program in peacekeeping operations, and the European Union is drafting legislation based on your veteran support framework." Before M could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Kenji in Japan. The Rising Sun Guardians had just mediated a decades-old conflict between rival motorcycle groups in Osaka. The solution? Turning their competing workshops into a joint veteran support center. "It's not just about bikes anymore," Mark observed, showing M his own phone. "Look at this, former gang members in Cape Town using our model to create youth entrepreneurship programs. They're calling it Guardian Rising Business Mentors." The impact was becoming clearer every day. Crime rates were dropping in areas with active Guardian chapters. Veteran suicide rates continued to decline. But perhaps most significantly, communities were healing in ways no one had expected. "Remember that troubled teen program we started?" David asked. "The education department just released the statistics. 92% graduation rate among participants. They're calling it the highest success rate of any intervention program in the country." Lucy, now heading the Guardian Angels Youth Leadership Council, had her own news. "We're launching in 50 new schools next month. Kids who used to join gangs are forming Guardian clubs instead. They're learning motorcycle maintenance, sure, but they're also learning about service, leadership, and community." The president's speech that day acknowledged something remarkable. "The Guardian Angels have shown us that the solution to many of our social problems isn't more enforcement, it's more engagement. When we give people a way to be strong by helping others, they choose that path." Later that evening, back at Starlight Drive-In, M met with an unusual group, policy experts from around the world, all seeking to understand the program's success. "The remarkable thing," a Norwegian sociologist explained, "is how the model adapts to different cultures while maintaining its core principles." In Oslo, former criminal motorcycle clubs are now running the city's largest youth mentorship program. A Brazilian community organizer added, "In Rio's favelas, ex-gang members who joined Guardian Angels have become more effective at preventing violence than any police initiative. They understand the community because they're part of it." "But how do you ensure it maintains its integrity as it grows?" a policy advisor asked. "How do you prevent it from losing its way?" M smiled and pointed to the diner's window. Outside, Mark was teaching a group of kids basic motorcycle maintenance while their parents, a mix of veterans, former gang members, and community leaders, shared coffee and conversation. "Because it's not built on rules or regulations," she explained. "It's built on transformation. Every person who changes becomes living proof that the program works. They become the guardians of its integrity." Maya, who had been quietly taking notes, spoke up. "Look at the data. In every country where we've established chapters, we see the same pattern. First, crime rates drop, then veteran support participation increases. Finally, community engagement rises across all demographics." "It's like a positive infection," Joe added, refilling coffee cups. "Once people see it working, they want to be part of it." The policy experts were fascinated by the diner itself, how this simple restaurant had become both the birthplace and the heart of a global movement. They took notes as regular customers interacted with Guardian Angels members, watching how naturally the program had woven itself into the community's fabric. "You know what's really revolutionary about this?" a Canadian policymaker observed. "It's showing that the best way to help veterans isn't to treat them as victims who need help, but as warriors who need purpose." M watched as Lucy led a group of international youth representatives through their new peer mentorship curriculum. The teenager who had once been afraid of her father's biker lifestyle was now teaching others how to transform their own communities. "The real policy change," M said finally, "isn't happening in government buildings. It's happening right here, in diners and garages and community centers around the world. We're not just changing laws, we're changing hearts." As the evening wound down, Joe brought one last round of coffee for everyone. The policy experts had long since put away their notebooks, drawn into the genuine warmth and connection they felt in this unexpected cradle of global change. "You know what they don't tell you in all those policy papers?" Joe asked, sitting down with them. "Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments of courage. Sometimes all it takes is one person willing to stand up and show others a better way." And so, the story that began with a confrontation in a small-town diner continued to unfold, touching lives across continents, proving that true strength lies not in the power to intimidate, but in the courage to transform, to serve, and to show others the way. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.